actually, in real terms, what is the state of the British military?
In 1997, we had a fleet. We had capability. Fast forward to where we are now, the fleet has been completely decimated. Decisions that have essentially disabled Britain's ability to defend itself. That was a conscious decision.
Do you think there's a role to play for the Royal Navy in controlling borders in the Channel?
I reckon I could end this with a private military contract and being in charge of the Home Office in a matter of months.
How would you do it?
Well, first of all, this will cause an international dispute with the French. But you've got to show them that we can stop it, and you should be doing this.
It's the Chagos deal.
Release the names of everyone that's been part of this, because this is a national scandal, one of the greatest scandals it has been. But let's be very clear. They've aligned other enemy superpowers to back them up in this case. They know it is a strategic mistake for us to give this up. Whatever happens with Taiwan is essentially the next 9/11 in scale of how it affects the global economy and how it affects international relations.
I want to talk about your experiences in South Africa.
There is a problem. I went there. And what's most staggering about the situation on farm murders, and this is really graphic if you read about it.
Before you hear from James Glancy, I ask, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like James Glancy exploring the issues you want to hear about that the mainstream media won't touch. And if you head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, you'll get exclusive videos, content, and ad-free viewing. But without further ado, James Glancy. James Glancy, thank you for coming to speak with me. A dazzling career, not only an officer in the Royal Marines, but you are also now a fantastic documentary maker, which is one of the things we're going to talk about today is your documentary on South Africa, interviewing Afrikaner farmers who have been the victim of horrific racially aggravated attacks. Obviously, that's in the news cycle because of Trump and what we saw at the White House with Cyril Ramaphosa. But before we get into that, there's a couple other things I wanted to talk about, and that is, well, there's Chagos, and because given your military background, I'm very keen to talk about that, and you've been outspoken about that. But I also want to talk about the military and the state of the British military today. I thought we might start by, if you don't mind, giving me a little bit of your background. I didn't even mention the fact that you are also a Brexit Party MEP, but your military background. I saw your documentary about Afghanistan, but for viewers who don't know your story, would you mind enlightening us?
No, of course. So when I was about 13, 14 years old, very hyperactive, I had two dreams, two different paths that I wanted to go on. One was go to RADA and become an actor.
Huh.
And the other one, I just joined Cadet Force, CCF, Combined Cadet Force at school. I started taking a real interest in being outdoors, soldiering, and just the whole physical and mental aspect of being in the military. It just started to work for me. And at the time, they used to have these regional recruitment officers, and they were very good at building you up to a point where you apply at quite a young age to become either an officer or be selected into the ranks. And I applied for this 6-1 scholarship whilst I was at school to join the army, which would have meant at 18, I'd have gone to Sandhurst. And I was successful. I got this 6-1 scholarship. And then at that time, and we're going to come back round to the strategic defence review that's about to happen or about to be released in the next 2 weeks. But around that time, there was a SDR under Lord Robertson, who, by the way, has just overseen
SDR?
A strategic defence review.
Oh, okay.
So essentially, it lays down what the state of the British Armed Forces, what the investment's going to be, what the force lay down, our priorities are, the equipment, budgets, the manpower. That happened around 1997 under Lord Robertson. And it's just happening again now in 2025 under Lord Robertson. That 1997 Defence Review was widely regarded as one of the best, and he was also regarded as one of the best secretaries of defence.
The review itself was the best, or what they reported was
the review itself, because it represented good funding across the British Armed Forces, good funding for the Royal Navy in particular, and the Royal Marines. So I was advised to also apply for the Royal Marines, a 6-1 scholarship, because they had invested in amphibious platforms. The 3 Commando Brigade was in a really well well-resourced position. So I applied to join the Royal Marines and also got this 6-on scholarship. And this was by, I think, 17, 18 years old. I then decided I'm going to do A-levels and go to university. So I applied again for a university scholarship called a cadetship. And the Royal Marines sponsored me through Oxford University. So I had this kind of, I say grooming, but this channel of knowing what I was going to do from about 16, 17 years old, where I was always focused through the cadets, through these various scholarships I had, to joining the military, particularly the Royal Marines. So I was very, very focused, almost like a professional sports person would be focused on that career from a young age. That's all I thought about. Everything, the way I trained, the way I talked, the way I dressed, was focused being on the military. And when I went to Oxford, everyone, they nicknamed me Marine James, Royal Marine James, just the way I conducted myself. Embarrassing, really, in hindsight. But when I joined university in 2001, I was required to do a month of Royal Marines training down at the Commando Training Centre in Lympstone. And that was September 2001. In about day 8 or 9 into training, the guys, there was some sort of commotion. We all went up to the officers' mess, and we had this little TV room back on the big TVs with the not the flat screens we had now. And 9/11 had happened. And that was really a hugely defining moment in everyone's military career, but also the British military, because we had been very much focused back then on state-on-state conflict, not terrorism. And that was a moment in time which marked what George W. Bush called the global war on terror. And the whole British military, which had been designed for state-on-state warfare, all the naval platforms, the way we were configured militarily, was for much more regular battle. I looked around that room, knowing that a few weeks later I'd be going to university. I then went to see the troop commander. I won't name him on here, but he's still involved with the Royal Marines. And I said, look, I don't want to go to university because I know that this YO batch will end up going into conflict, and I want to be part of that. And he said, look, everything has changed now. It's going to be there when you come out. Go away and join university. You've got a good course to go and do. It'll stand you in good stead. So, of course, that batch ended up going to Iraq and Afghanistan. My officers sent me to Oxford. I finished, read modern history. By the time I came out and completed my Royal Marines training, 2 months later, I found myself in Afghanistan at the age of 21, in command of 30 Royal Marines of different ages and experience. And that was Operation Herrick 4 in 2006. So between, say 1996, 97, that Strategic Defence Review, and a decade later, bear in mind 97, I was barely a teenager. In that decade, I had gone through this system of being trained and educated, paid for by the Royal Marines. I've come out the other side, and at 21 years old, out of university, and suddenly at war. And so, of course, that had a very important, defining moment, or being very, very much defined who I am and my life, because I then did 3 tours of Afghanistan, spent a decade of my life up until 31 as a regular Royal Marines officer. When I left the armed forces in my 30s, I carried on doing some time in the reserves. But everything I knew up until about 11 years ago was really defined by going into the military system age 16.
Can you tell me anything about your tours in Afghanistan?
I can tell you lots of things, and there's lots of things I can't tell you. It's a legacy conflict, one that I would describe as a failed intervention. When we went in 2006, it was, I just try and picture getting off, when you get off the plane in Kabul, I think it was sort of February, March, it was quite cold. And you just don't know what to expect. I didn't know when we went out the gates of Kabul airport, whether the guys on top cover, I remember them cocking their weapons in these Saxon vehicles. And these Saxon armoured vehicles were they were used in the Northern Ireland days. So the patrol, I think, had these snatch vehicles, some of them unarmored, and these Saxon vehicles, and we were all in there. They hadn't even given us our ammunition. So I thought, what if we go out the gate and get ambushed or contacted? I just didn't have any idea of just the extent to which, or where the combat or where the fight was. We then went to this patrol, or forward operating base that the Brits had in Kabul called Camp Suta. And at that point, you get issued your ammunition, you get your intelligence brief, and you start to understand where the threat is, what this country's about. But it takes you a long time to suddenly understand what we're doing, who these people are. And I cannot explain enough just how different the culture and the place was, and how far removed it is from anything British people would have ever experienced, to suddenly being operating in a country where people look at you as if you're aliens, don't understand why you're there, and don't want you there. And so that was my first tour. By the second tour, we went down to operate in Helmand, and that was a sort of low to medium scale intensity combat zone. And that's where we started taking casualties. We were in combat most days. But by that point, 2007 and 2008, Britain and America had firmly got itself stuck into a conflict, which it hadn't really completely defined what success would look like, but had no way out.
Do you think, from a military point of view, the idea of not knowing exactly what success looks like was confusing for those of you on the ground?
Well, if I looked, by my second tour, I was a bit more mature. I knew what I was doing. I was combat experienced within 2 or 3 months of that second tour. But if I looked at myself in the mirror or any of my men and said, what is the mission here in Afghanistan? What are we here to achieve? Some would say would be to root out terrorism and Al-Qaeda. Bearing in mind at that time, ISIS didn't exist around the 2008 mark. It was about Al-Qaeda. So that would fall into the counter-terrorism bracket. Eliminate these bad people, which of course you can't do because it's an idea. Secondly, some people would say, well, we're here to build Afghanistan up as a nation so it no longer becomes a haven for terrorism, and we're here to give them human rights, education, and economic prosperity, and a system of government, a democratic system of government. That's the sort of concept of nation building. And somewhere between those two was the mission, but no one defined what the nation should look like or how it would really operate. And we as the military were there to try and create peace and security in areas by bombing the population essentially into submission, or patrolling an area, and somehow on the back of that, international development and people would come in and teach them the rules of law, government, how to govern, how to run their economy, and then they were meant to become a sort of more westernized nation, which of course was never going to happen. Didn't happen, and we know how the story ends in 2021. Is that Afghanistan has gone back further than it was when we entered in 2001. The Taliban controlled the entire country, and when we went in 2001, it didn't control the entire country. It didn't have full control. It's now better armed.
It's armed to the teeth. I mean, that's the obvious thing with the Biden pullout in 21, is that he didn't take out any of the American military, whatever the supplies, or something like 30 billion. Have I got that right?
Oh, so yeah. Well, look, we put lots of weapons and kit into the country, but I think what the reason I find it interesting to talk about Afghanistan now is just how massively the world has changed. The strategic focus has gone back to state-on-state conflict, preparing for potential conflict with Russia or China. And that's why it's interesting to talk about where I was in 1997 to now. 2 weeks before Lord Robertson releases the new Strategic Defence Review. In that time, we've gone full circle, and we've had this blip in the middle where we've been distracted by trying to fight ideas in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Somalia, or in the Maghreb and Western Africa. We've been trying to fight people with AK-47s and notions of extreme Islamism, Islamic terrorism. Meanwhile, we took our eye off the ball on what Putin was doing in Russia. We took our eye off the ball on the massive development China as a nation was going under economically, militarily, advancing AI, its ability to
shipbuilding capacity is
every
astronomically
capacity,
higher than ours.
The Belt and Road Initiative. And we're now here trying to catch up ourselves on the advancements these other nations have made because we distracted ourselves with these conflicts. We undermined the credibility of our own nations, the credibility of our armed forces. We didn't invest in the right equipment. And here we are today, a much weaker country. Britain is much weaker than it was internationally in 2001, 1997, 2001. And America is no longer the only imperial superpower. We live in a multipolar world where what we regarded as the international rules-based order of the time really no longer exists. We're back in a new imperial age. We're almost back to 1989, but a different type of Cold War. But the respect for the international institutions, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the norms of treaties and laws have all been torn up, or in some cases used against us, as we see with Chagos. But we've strategically, as a nation, been caught napping or been massively distracted, and we find ourselves in a huge predicament.
So is there individuals on the British side to blame, apart from the strategy itself, in that a war on terror is part of it, and the, I guess, neoconservative philosophy, and I'm sure we can talk about Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair lying to the people about what Iraq had and did not have. Are there other individuals that we can blame for this decline and who took their eye off the ball exactly?
Well, it made sense at the time to talk up the concept of the special relationship. That was really why we ended up getting. Remember, these weren't our conflicts. These were American conflicts, and Al Qaeda, Bin Laden. The reason they formed, they wanted to get America out of Israel, also out of Palestine. They wanted to get them out of Yemen. This was really a war, America's war, that we got involved in, and Tony Blair sold the nation, sold the cabinet, the vision that we've got to be hand in hand with America. So essentially what we did was we outsourced our foreign policy to America. We gave up what is in the British national interest. So before, when we had an empire, when we were managing the decline of an empire, there would have been such thing as what is in the British national interest. And out of that, you decide your foreign policy, you decide the laydown of your armed forces, your economy. That all went away when Tony Blair decided to drag us to outsource our foreign policy to the USA and to outsource our economic and social policy to the European Union. He essentially gutted Britain of its ability to govern itself and decide for itself. Mm-hmm. And they've outsourced our rulemaking to the EU. They outsourced our judiciary to the ECHR and the ICJ and to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, signed us up to all sorts of international, supranational bodies, and then followed America into battle.
But we had an obligation under our NATO alliance to follow America.
Well, I mean, we did, but there's a lot of members of NATO who made different decisions on the extent of which they would get involved. And they contributed. There were nations there, so there was a camp, a bar, and a few helicopters, and that was their contribution. We went lock.
What do you mean a bar?
Well, this is the interesting thing about Kabul in the early 2000s was just like a party. There was so much international development money, embassy money, and a lot of the nations because I think that there were 36 plus nations of ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force. They all would have their own area within a camp or their own camp. So they'd have their own supermarkets, their own restaurants, and their own bars. And Britain had at Camp Suta the two can rule, so a soldier could drink 2 cans of beer a day. But like, for example, the Spanish or Italians I don't think there was a rule on how much they could drink. So and the embassies used to have parties, and there were clubs set up, nightclubs set up in Kabul. So it was just a big party. Meanwhile, some Brits, a big element of Brits down in Helmand, were doing some serious fighting, and a lot of Americans all around the provinces were doing a lot of fighting. So it was really a choice to what extent the NATO nations decided that they were really going to go lock stock in step with American neoconservative foreign policy of nation building or doing whatever America intended to do in Iraq. A lot of nations paid lip service to that. But, ultimately, when you talk about an attack on a NATO member, the Falklands was attacked by Argentina. Our sovereign territory was attacked, and America didn't send an aircraft carrier. They supported us logistically. They supported us with very important intelligence. And if you wind back the clock prior to that, in Vietnam, we didn't overtly enter into the Vietnam conflict. That there may have been elements that got themselves involved in some way, but we didn't overtly get involved.
But America hadn't had their territory invaded, so I don't think we were obliged to, were we?
No, but what my point being is with the Falklands, but also with the other NATO members, the way they behaved and operated in Kabul and in Afghanistan is we made a decision, or Blair made the decision, that we're going to put everything into this fight. Mm-hmm. And my point here is, at what point did the cabinet look at themselves and say, how is this in Britain's the interests of the British people and in the interests of the future of this country? How is this good for our trade? How is this good for our international reputation? Or how much of a threat, the question was, and it's a little bit like COVID actually with group mentality, how much of a threat really is Islamic terrorism to to nation-state democracy in Britain?
It's not nothing.
No, it's not. But do we need to throw the entire kitchen sink at it and get involved in Iraq and Afghanistan? And I think that question is fundamental of where we are today and where we will be in the future. Is I believe that British government, the British governing class, the establishment, the civil service, no longer ask the question, what is good for Britain? What foreign policy, what economic policy is good for the British nation state and good for the British people? I don't think that factors in to any conversation when decisions are made at government.
Well, that's for sure with the Chagos deal, but we'll come back to that. You've described what the current British military is in comparison with others, but actually, in real terms, what is the state of the British military?
I'm not as qualified to speak on this as I was, but I still keep up with military developments with lots of friends. I read. I still visit. I was actually had our 20-year batch reunion recently, so we had a nice time down at the Commando Training Centre. Look, in 1997, we had a fleet. We had capability. We went down to Sierra Leone in September 2006 on what was Operational Exercise Vela, and that fleet that went with HMS Ocean, which was the LPH, we had this commando helicopter carrier. We went down to Sierra Leone because they were having elections just after the West Side Boys had been kicked out. If you remember, the West Side Boys were the guys that came in lopping people's arms off, took over Freetown. It's the basis of the Blood Diamond film. Mm-hmm. Brilliant film. When we went down there with the fleet to remind any elements that were thinking of bad behaviour during the Sierra Leone elections that Britain is here, and if you behave badly, the Royal Marines are just offshore with the Royal Navy, and we will smash you. Mm-hmm. We are supporting this Commonwealth country. We had power. We had the ability to do gunboat diplomacy. You fast forward to where we are now, the fleet has been completely decimated, and the availability of key platforms such as destroyers, frigates, and submarines is pathetic because the numbers are so low, the maintenance costs are so high. They are struggling to maintain what we have, and so the availability of frigates and destroyers to go and perform an action like that is all but gone. Now we have aircraft carriers with some new jets, but what we haven't done, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, is because we invested so much in counterterrorism and counter-terror wars, we didn't invest in our regular components, such as more frigates, more destroyers, such as long-range missiles and artillery for the army. All the time, China's been building up their defense base, their regular defense capability. They've been integrating artificial intelligence now, drone warfare, robotic warfare. We cut at almost every defense review since 1997. We reduced our capacity to deploy a significant amount of force. Now, I don't know what the next SDR is going to look like. I hear it's going to try and rebuild our industrial capacity. It's going to ensure there's investment in new technology. And it should hopefully maintain or increase the number of platforms we have available in the Royal Navy and increase resilience and our ability to fight war. But as we've seen with the catastrophic losses in Ukraine, we have such a small armed forces now. We couldn't sustain those types of casualties whatsoever.
Yeah.
We back then, I think we were over 110, 120,000 in the British Armed Forces.
When you started?
Yeah.
97.
Well, yeah, now I think we're hovering around the 70,000 mark. And a really important contrast I want to say here, and I don't want to get caught up in the immigration debate because everyone talks about this, but there are on the Home Office terror watch list, when they last released the figures, they are thought to be 38,000 people on the terrorist watch list in Britain. So we have an armed forces of 70,000.
Sorry, it's actually worse than that.
It's probably worse now.
It's 44,000, 39,000 of whom are Islamists.
Yeah, so if you just think there's that number of people that have been highlighted as hating this country that have been reported here, and yet we've run down our armed forces to that extent. That's why I keep saying, who is making the decisions and why are they not basing them on what is best for our nation state democracy, for the British national interest, for our security and defence? Those people have made decisions that have essentially disabled Britain's ability to defend itself. And certainly those conflicts abroad that I was part and fought in have undermined our strength, our respect around the world. They've undermined our armed forces.
There's one specific detail that you just passed over there, is that there's been ever decreasing defense budget. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so what's the ideology behind that? Because it's not necessarily the case that whatever happened in the neocon wars that we would then also decrease our budget. We might.
Americans didn't tell us it. In fact, the Americans have been telling us to increase it. And
exactly.
Well, it's extraordinary. We've got this massive national debt, which at any point could rear its head and crash this country. There could be a run on the pound, run on the markets. Could be massive increase in government borrowing. The ideology, you have to look back to the Conservatives in 2010, austerity after 2008 financial crash. The decision was made by the Conservative Party that there's no votes in defence within the British public. We're going to move to a more socialist, New Labour model, which is high social welfare spending, high government spending, borrowing to spend, but that money's not going to go in the armed forces. That was a conscious decision agreed and signed off by all the defence ministers and prime ministers from 2010 and chancellors, is that defence isn't a priority. And if you go back to the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, you will see generals and ministers saying that we now live in an era of grey zone conflict, i.e. below the threshold of state-on-state warfare, i.e. we won't go to war with states anymore, so we don't need aircraft carriers or frigates or big standing armed forces. It will always be terrorism or little grey men operating to cut undersea cables or do things that just are below the threshold of regular warfare. And so they use this concept of failing to prepare, or this deliberately bad predictions about the future, and I call them deliberate. It was obvious what was coming down the line, to justify cutting defence. And all the while they said there's no point of investing in defence because we won't get any votes in this. And maybe they were proved right. The British public didn't seem to mind as battalion after battalion regimental was destroyed, the frigate after frigate was cut, and all our orders were cut. It just kept happening. So it's almost been like, throwing they said the old terminology of putting a frog into a cold pan and letting it heat up slowly. The reverse has happened in that the public has just, and the establishment has just accepted this decline in British capability and British influence abroad. But that also goes into step. What I say is no one really cares at government level about the British national interest.
Perhaps you can make the case about why Britain should have a larger defence funding and a larger military, and I say that because I was thinking about Hong Kong, for example, and much of the political decisions made around Hong Kong in 2020, 2021, particularly to allow the BNOs into Britain, but also the fact that the CCP had reneged on the deal done about the Hong Kong handover. They were coming into Hong Kong much sooner than the 50-year promise they had agreed on. But the fact of the matter is, we couldn't really argue with it because they had such a huge military. We can't exactly go to war with the CCP. That's like completely infeasible. But even if we'd had proper defence spending and a proper military, we could never really have done that. So in a world where you have a huge American military, a huge Chinese and Russia and all these other great powers, what's the case that Britain should increase to compete with those? Well, can it even compete?
Well, I think the British way of life, British values, democracy, rule of law is the best system that the world has known. And Hong Kong was better under British rule than it is under Chinese rule. Zimbabwe was better as Rhodesia than it is as Zimbabwe under the ZANU PF. A lot of countries around the world were better under the British Empire than they are now. No one's making that case, but it's very, very obvious. And I'll say this about the Chagos. The Chagos will be badly managed under Mauritius. There's a huge marine protected area around that which will be destroyed.
Yeah.
Make the case of Britain. Britain as a prosperous and powerful nation is a force for good in the world. We were at the forefront of designing what was known as a rules-based international order. The world is better under that system than it is under a resurgent Russia, a powerful China, and many other belligerent nation states. We forgot to make the case that the world is better when we are influential, when we are economically prosperous and we are powerful. And that's the case that we need to make. And that's the case I want to make in the future. When we win the next election in 2029, is every focus should be about making Britain the most powerful and prosperous nation in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, making us a regional power again, because the world and other nations benefit when we take that leadership role.
So when you say when we win, who's we in that case?
The right.
The right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now, Britain is in a serious period of decline, and it's been deliberately. It's been that decline has been deliberately sped up by the Labour government under Keir Starmer, under Ed Miliband, the drive for net zero, handing away the Chagos, higher regulation, borrowing. We'll see how the Strategic Defence Review, but as everyone knows, that Britain isn't working. Unbelievably high immigration. The next election is absolutely crucial for this country. We're at a crossroads of, do we go into a state of decline where it's never recoverable to be a prosperous and powerful nation again, where we would become one big welfare state. We'd become essentially an international refugee camp or international charity for everyone from all around the world, where we've lost our identity, our history, our heritage, our Christian values. Our armed forces are completely in the doldrums, and we end up signing up through the back door to the European Union and become a vassal state again of the EU. That's one path. That's one pill that you can choose to swallow. Or there is another one, which is national renewal, some sort of agreement, coupon election between what's left of the Conservative Party and the Reform Party, but under a Project 2029 type plan, like America had their Project 2025, which is a renewal of the state, reduce the size of the state, reduce our national debt, deregulate, invest in education and young people, invest in our armed forces, control our borders, get rid of those people that have no right to be here or hate this country, invest in cheap energy, wherever that comes from. Without cheap energy, you cannot be a prosperous nation, reindustrialize to some extent, and have a vision, which is we believe in Britain, we believe in our values, but to do that, we have to love ourselves, and we have to want to be prosperous, and we have to be powerful. We have to give the country an option: decline or rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't disagree with that.
2029 or 28, with the next election, is the battle for Britain, and if we lose it, Britain is lost.
Yeah. I suspect you're right about that, but I want to just a couple of questions on the military. I very rarely get to speak to people with your background. Do you think there's a role to play for the Royal Navy in controlling borders? So, for example, in the Channel? I mean, that sounds like a little bit exaggerated or perhaps extreme. I don't know if you actually play it out in my head.
Look, I reckon I could end this with a contract, a private military contract, and being in charge of Home Office in a matter of months.
Excuse me?
You
could end the Channel crossings?
Yeah.
How would you do it?
Well, first of all, you have to with the Conservatives to start this, there has to be an information campaign and the laws in place, which is, if you come here illegally, buy these boats, you will never be a British citizen, you will never be entitled to work, and you will be deported to anywhere. We have to get agreements to remove these people, mainly back to the countries they come from. But they have to know that, okay, they might be here temporarily, it might take some time, but you're going to be in a camp, in a tent, as you were in Calais, because they're in these massive camps. Your situation is not going to improve, and you're essentially just waiting to be deported. So you have to disincentivize them, number one.
That worked in America, by the way. If you look at since Trump's second inauguration.
Australia as well.
It worked in Australia.
It worked because they just took them out to random Pacific islands until they eventually went home. Secondly, you saw...
I'm sorry, but just to be specific, when I say what worked is by killing the incentive, you stopped people bothering trying in the first place.
It's expensive and dangerous.
Yeah.
But we are a soft touch. If you kill the incentive, that's the main thing. But secondly, GB News was able to go around the other day and find immigrants that were on their way over and find boats. But private military contractors, okay, the French might not like this, but they are really easy to find. It's very easy to infiltrate Care for Calais and all those organisations that are helping advise the immigrants coming over. You just send teams of blokes over with knives to slash up every single boat, because you know where they go from. These networks are easy to infiltrate, and you physically just stop it happening. The French aren't doing this. We're paying them to do that, and they're refusing to do it.
We're paying them a lot, right?
Yeah, but they're not interested. This is a deliberate act.
So you would send the British military?
No, not the military. Private military contract.
I'm not really
interested in how that. This is an existential threat to Britain. There are ways of doing this. If you start it, and the French, this will cause an international this will cause an international dispute with the French. But you've got to show them undercover that we can stop it, and you should be doing this. They will get kicked out eventually, but you can go over there and slash the boats, because there is a network that says to these people, right, be at this location at this time for your boat. Very easy to infiltrate. They're not using secure phones like drugs gangs. They're using mobile phones. So the French know when and where these things are happening.
Do we have any idea of what the French have achieved in their obligations to us?
Well, Look at the numbers.
We look at the numbers.
Look at the numbers. They've achieved.
But surely they're coming back to us and saying, we managed to do this, that, and the other.
Yeah,
and say, please have some more money.
But I mean, this is deliberate. Don't think for a second this isn't deliberate by Macron. This is just part of punishing Britain and the British government and the British people for Brexit from Macron. This is by design that they're sending them over here. This is not accidental. So that you have to, first of all, show the French that we know how to stop it on your beaches. Second, we have to show the people that are incentivized to come here, don't bother because you're wasting your time, you're going to be leaving. You get those two things in order. Oh, and by the way, of course, everyone will say, oh, you'll be dragged through the courts. This is predicated on binning the Human Rights Act, leaving the ECHR, and overturning all case law since the Human Rights Act. So there's a bit of work to do there, but that's part and parcel of the project, parcel of Project 2029.
So, and just trying to think, how could it be legal to send people to slash up the boats who are so this is private groups you'd hire private groups to slash up, but that, I know I'm not saying it's wrong to do it, like I would support it, but it doesn't sound like it's legal. I don't see that could possibly be legal.
Britain gets involved in a lot of things all around the world. There's denial because is this a existential threat to British security and the lives of the British people? The answer is yes. We saw the other day there's an Iranian cell had come over on boats and were planning attacks on a synagogue. It's an act of terrorism. Yeah. So are we justified?
It's an existential threat. Yeah.
Are we justified?
Morally justified
in stopping that upstream? Yeah. Look, this is not something that will last very long. But when you show the French we can do it, we've got to take bold action.
I mean, there's bolder action, which is to reclaim Calais, make Calais England.
Well, yeah, but I'm not saying that. But I genuinely think we need to set an example to the French that we're paying you this money. We could do this on 2 million. Look, you won't last long until you're kicked out and you cause an international dispute. But you have to take bold actions to say to them, we know you're doing nothing, and we want you to start doing this because you can stop it.
Yeah.
Stop beating us over the head over Brexit. That's what this is about.
Yeah.
But I can assure you, it's really about incentives and showing the French that we're not going to tolerate any longer. If you carry on doing this, we'll rip up your fishing deal. Which we should do anyway, by the way.
Yeah, that's such an embarrassment.
But we really, really... But this, do you see what I mean about standing up for the national interest versus kowtowing to the lawyers or to these rules that have been set out under the Human Rights Act or to the courts? The courts and the law is not operating in the British national interest. If something is not good for Britain, change the law. And if the law is fixed, as it is within the ECHR, leave the ECHR. Everything comes back to one question. And I don't understand this as a member of Parliament, why it isn't written or they're not made to sign up to a contract which is you will serve every day as a member of Parliament serving the British national interest, making decisions that are in the interest of the British people and your constituent and nothing else. Not your own career.
Yeah.
Not your own business interests. You are there to serve the British national interest. That's what British soldiers do. People risk their lives for this country, at home and abroad, in intelligence, in the police, in the armed forces. They risk their lives because they believe in the ideal of Britain. They believe in protecting this country, and they're willing to pay the ultimate price. And yet you've got politicians and the establishment that for years has not put in the Britain first. As a former soldier, someone that loves this country, don't understand why that is not the only component that goes into governance. And this is why people might laugh and say, oh, you're an idiot thinking you can send people over to slashes. But you can physically do it. We can pay them to do it. I don't care what the law says. I don't care how upset the French get. I don't care because it will bring them to the negotiating table. It's called gunboat diplomacy in old wordage. It's the modern day version of that. And it works.
A perfect example of the courts working against Britain and the British elite working against Britain is the Chagos deal, which we've alluded to a couple of times now in this conversation. So you've been outspoken about this. Starmer has said that all the international community are supporting what the international courts have ruled, that the Chagos archipelago should go back to Mauritius. I'm even hesitant to say go back there because I'm not entirely convinced that that's the right wordage. I actually spoke to some Chagosians who have been living in Britain for the last 20 years who do not want to be part of Mauritius. They want an independent Chagos deal. There's a lot of detail we could give here. I don't know if you want to tell the story of Chagos.
So first of all, Mauritius has no claim to it.
It's a bit more complicated than that.
Well, they were also paid to renounce claims. So they've already paid them once, and they agreed to renounce claims. So that was all legally justified.
Wait, hang on a sec. Wait, they do have some claim. They had claim in that when it was a British colony, Chagos, even though Chagos is 2,000 miles away from Mauritius, it was in 1965 decoupled from Mauritius as a political entity. Created its.
Mauritius didn't own it before. It was British.
It was British. Yeah.
Other nations had it. So the Chagosians were put there by other nations.
Yes, they were the descendants of slaves.
Yes.
But they'd been there for a couple of hundred years or a few hundred years.
Look, let's just get. I don't have the detailed historical knowledge to say about what happened in that period. But whatever settlement was agreed, they agreed under international law that they didn't have any rights to the British Indian Overseas Territory, or the Chagos in particular, and signed for that and been paid for it. They have then used the international courts, led by British lawyers like Philippe Sands, and worked with their allies China and Russia to use the ICJ to launch a claim that they should have sovereignty for the Chagos, and they've aligned other enemy superpowers to back them up in this case. And of course, the activist United Nations, this rules-based international order that I talked of, has been weaponized against us by our enemies. They know it is a strategic mistake for us to give this up. It's better that it's in the control of a weak nation like Mauritius, and so they have supported the legal claim at the United Nations. They've supported that to have a decision to say that we have to cede sovereignty to Mauritius, even though that's not a valid claim.
I've got a bit further than that. The enemies of Britain want to see Britain weaker. There's also and this is very much in the ideology of Philippe Sands, who, as far as I'm concerned, is a fifth columnist.
Yeah,
he's a British lawyer and
dual national.
What's his other nationality?
French and Mauritian.
He's French and Mauritian.
Yeah, we're going to take away his passport if we can in the future.
Which one?
Philippe. Well, not the Mauritian one. But this should be the punishment for treachery, by the way.
He gloats about it.
He might be laughing now, but he won't be laughing in 2030.
Right. He is. I mean, I actually read his book over the weekend. Talking about Chagos, and he is explicitly motivated by this decolonization ideology. Yeah. For him, it's all about that, and he's actually completely woke as well. If you look at his language, he capitalizes B to describe all black people.
That's interesting. I should read that book because that really that helps you understand the Foreign Office and many members of the civil service.
Yeah, if you want to understand the elite globalist, decolonized, anti-British,
doing exactly everything I talked about, the national interest. They're doing everything against the national interest. It's about an ideology.
Yes.
They're not interested in the British people. They're not interested in the strength and prosperity of Britain or our ideals.
Yes.
And this is what makes me so livid, is that why do we even bother to fight? Why do we bother to sign up to fight for this country when you've got people actively in government trying to undermine us?
Yes.
That's what's happened.
Worth saying that Sands claims he's never talked to Starmer about
he's
Chagos.
lying. He's lying, obviously.
It's worse than what you describe, because he describes in the book being emotional with joy when the courts rule in favor of Chagos against Britain. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that he's doing a sort of duty like, even a criminal needs a lawyer in court. It's not like there's a sort of responsibility. It's like for him, it's like he's so happy to see this turnaround. Now, it's also worth unpacking a little bit further, if I may, which is that he might say, I was happy because those Chagosians who in 1965 had been forcibly removed under Harold Wilson and sent to Mauritius under horrible conditions. And I agree, horrible conditions. And it was wrong for the British to have done that. And they've been paid reparations multiple times.
It was wrong.
Along the way. And I would totally argue that, yes, if those Chagosians want to go back to their Chagosian homeland, I would support that. But he's conflated that with the question of who controls Chagos. And he hasn't argued for independence for the Chagosians. He wants them to be part of Mauritius, and it's that conflation of who controls that land and what happened, justice for those 1,500 so victims in '65, is why he might say that's why he's emotional, but it's not. So for me, that if you want an insight, it's that book.
Well, he hates Britain. He hates our country. He hates what we stand for. But I think what annoys me the most is the most logical thing to do here, and the Tories didn't do this, just utterly rudderless, leaderless, without any sense of love of this country. They should have got a plan together which said, what do the Mauritians really want? What's in the British national interest? How can we make this go away? And also, how do we actually right the wrongs of the past of the Chagosians? They had a legitimate claim to occupy some of those islands. Also, what's in our strategic interest of our allies like America? The Chagos, by the way, Biot, I remember when we joined the Marines,
British Indian Ocean Territory.
Yeah, British Indian Overseas Territory. There used to be like a section of Royal Marines down there, 8 Royal Marines, and all they do would like do fizz and sleep with like the American women that were based down there at the base. And just
were you ever through there?
No, I went to war. That was always
because it was a base.
Yeah, it's an American base, but we didn't. Our fleet never really. Well, not we have much of a fleet, but we didn't really use this. This is useful for America. It's where the British flag has stood, and we've actually used it as a force for good by creating this marine protected area around it, which is a good thing. But what should have been done was how can we make Mauritius go away? What options are there? Their economy's tanked. They're in massive debt. They need money. So part of it is money. Part of it is a sense of national pride. Their government, unlike ours, is doing what's in their national interest. There must have been a deal that could have been worked upon with America. Bear in mind, none of this would have happened if we'd gone to America and say we don't want to secede this. It's clearly in the interest. This has clearly been pushed by Russia and China. Will you support us in sharing a deal? And that deal would have looked like some form of joint sovereignty with a payment to Mauritius to help them with their national debt. So they feel like they've gained something, a flag on an island in the middle of nowhere, and some sort of joint governance deal with them, where also the Chagosians get to occupy and build on some of these islands. So it would have solved the Mauritian financial issue to some extent. Strategically, us in America would have kept it, but more importantly, keep it out of the hands of the Russians and Chinese. It would have been to the benefit of the Chagosians. Everyone could have been happy and would have got rid of these court cases. I did not hear one person make an alternative argument. It was either the Conservatives was like, hands over our ears, let's pretend it goes away. And the establishment, the Foreign Office, the Philippe Sands lot, Labour we've got to decolonise, regardless of British national interest.
Yeah,
and we should have sensible government, which is leading to solutions that are viable and in the national interest. And that's not what happened here. Now, when it comes to the next government, they've obviously got to do the unthinkable and rip up this treaty and say we're not paying for it, because the Americans can pay for it, or we need to push them back to the negotiating table saying we're ripping it up. What are you going to do about it? You don't have a navy. Yeah. But that's down the line. That's something we're going to have to deal with.
Let's come to that, because I'm curious about that. But with regards to the money aspect, everything we've said sort of would make sense of why, perhaps from a decolonialist point of view, we give back the territory. But the money aspect, why are we paying them? Is that just a continuation?
It's reparations. Like Philippe Sands has worked with.
Is that explicitly just reparation?
Well,
why on earth?
Bear in mind, we have the power. If we said no, you can have it. We could have just said you can have it. We're keeping the base. this is the deal, and they would have had to accept it.
Have they said explicitly it's reparations? It's mind-boggling to understand with Starmer making the cuts he's making.
Yeah, of course it's reparations.
Because we've paid reparations several times to the Chagossians.
Yeah, but why?
It's the Mauritian government who didn't give the money that we gave them to give to the Chagossians.
I think what's very important for the next government is to release all the negotiations and release the names of everyone that's been part of this, because this is a national scandal, one of the greatest scandals that has been in recent foreign policy. This is an embarrassment on scale of the Suez crisis. So, we need to find out more information. Whose ideas were this? What were the terms laid down? Why have we agreed to give over 30 billion in payments to the Chagossians, to the Mauritians, for a base that we don't use and the Americans use? There's so much to this. I do not understand. But let's be very clear. Because we're a Supreme Court, a United Nations permanent member, any ruling made by the UN could have been blocked by us eventually. We could have blocked it and ignored it. China ignores UN rulings. Russia does. And let's be clear here, there's big power politics to play in the next few years. China intends to invade Taiwan by 2028. They're going to be very distracted. They're not going to be interested. They were never going to really force the issue with the Chagos, and they can't. And they will be looking. They'll be looking to do deals with everybody, because we're going to be in this state. Whatever happens with Taiwan is essentially the next 9/11 in scale of how it affects the global economy and how it affects international relations. So this really is a minor side issue that could have been ignored by the British government, or at least a deal that could have been created that was satisfactory to everyone. But they chose not to do that, and now we're going to pay. Not only are we going to pay for it, but have you seen? I don't know if you saw this week. The Russians have now signed a fisheries and research deal with Mauritius, which is going to give them access,
this week,
yes, to the British Indian Overseas Territory. Those islands. That means you will see the Russian listening boats, or the vessels that go and do underwater espionage that we see all around the UK and around the Atlantic. They'll now be entering into the Chagos archipelago. There'll be fishing contracts signed to destroy the coral reefs and the biodiversity. They'll be signed with India, Sri Lanka, and Russia. So this area is going to get pillaged, and it's become this sort of mini Cold War as a result of this deal.
And they'll miss us. And I note also on the Sands book is that he doesn't address any of the geopolitical consequences.
You're not interested
of handing over the deal. And in fact, and if you listen to Starmer, he'll say it's in our military interest. He says it's an interest. I'm not quite sure why, because he says something like it'll secure that the Americans can be there for a century or something like that.
Why is it our job to secure the American national interest?
Why were they not secure with us being there? We're already secure.
I mean, America's pretty secure because it has 12 aircraft carriers. I think you've got to understand. Starmer is a liar. He isn't interested in the national interest. He was a member of the Fabian Society. He's a socialist at school. He's a radical activist. He is of the same breed, same cut as Felipe Sands. He doesn't love this country. He's trying to undermine it. He's signing bad deals with the European Union. He's signed this horrendous surrender with the Chagos. This is not a man that is governing the national interest. So forget anything he says.
Yes, yeah, quite. On, let's say, 2029.
The battle for Britain.
The battle for Britain. And the right are in. What would you do about Chagos? Is there actually a feasible argument to, or even possibility?
Yeah, you
take it back.
You can cancel treaties and things.
You can cancel treaties. Well, hang on. So you obviously.
What's the point taking it back? It's a pretty useless area. I think we just said,
no. What?
No. What I mean is.
What do you mean? You're just undermining your own argument.
No, not saying it's just strategically important that the Russians don't have it. We've already got the base of one. No, what I'm saying is, it's up to Americans to pay for it. To take it back. We're not going to send an amphibious carrier. We don't. It's taking back sovereignty is going to be difficult because it won't be recognized by the international community. But what we can do is when China invades Taiwan, then I think we're going to have to do an agreement with China to recognize that they've invaded Taiwan, or there's going to be the status. And one of those things we can say to them is, look, we are nullifying this agreement with Mauritius. and it's biot again. And what are you going to do about it? There's gonna the
And it's
world's
what
going to be
again? It's
biot again.
okay. Yeah.
We're gonna. Look, first things first is we need to say we're not paying. We can't afford to pay for it. This country's broke. If America wants to continue that agreement, fine. But the British tax. I think that's the first things first. We've just got to tear up the financial element of it. When that happens, it will push Mauritius back to the negotiating table, and that's the point where we can say, well, look, we either give you some money to do a joint sovereignty agreement in order that the Russians and the Chinese cannot come near this base, or the Americans step in. I think it has to. We have to force the issue like that. That we either hand the problem to America because it's really an American problem. But I think to me, it's about the money, and so we're not paying. Does it really matter?
Remind me
By the way,
what the money
I
is.
define the British national interest as our power and prosperity being us being a regional player in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. That's the Pacific, and we should be saying to the Americans, we will invest in our economy and our armed forces to be a powerful Atlantic power again. You guys take control of that. You can either pay these guys or take over sovereignty of it, but the Mauritius can't protect it. They will auction off the fishing rights. They will allow Chinese and Russian vessels in there to play subversive wars against the base at the Chagos. So this we've essentially allowed a new Cold War to be played out around that very important strategic territory. Because essentially it's an immovable aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
As we know, aircraft carriers are vulnerable. They're expensive. We have this island there where you can launch strategic and nuclear bombers from, where you can refuel and replenish your submarines. It's a very important Pacific asset, and America uses it most. Mm-hmm. So I think this is about the reorientation of British policy towards what's best for Britain, what's best for our allies, America, and in Europe. It's not having a new colonial foreign policy. I don't think is really in anyone's interests. But we mustn't pay the Mauritians for what is legally ours, and they had no claim for it. That's my view on it. Can we tear up? Maybe. Let's see what the lie of the land politically is in 2029, 30. I personally, there's going to be so many issues facing this country and facing the world. It's not something that we will probably want to afford a huge amount of political capital towards. But absolutely, we should not be paying them 100 million a year. They should be paying us.
Last question on the military before we get to South Africa is that it's been posited as a possibility that there's some sort of British peacekeeping force as part of a Russian-Ukraine deal. I'm very doubtful that the Russians would ever accept the British having a presence in that territory. But I was curious to your opinion on was if that's remotely feasible, whether there would be any appetite from the British military, or not that they would have a choice, they'd have to follow orders, I suppose, but I guess appetite from the British people. And I'm just curious about the feasibility of that.
Well, it is feasible. We've had troops in Estonia. We always used to have troops stationed in Germany during the Cold War until we crazily withdrew them from Paderborn in Germany. I think the British Armed Forces would be up for it because service personnel want to deploy in operations. They wanted to do things, and that would be an interesting operation. I support Ukraine. What Russia has done is wrong. I personally just want to see an end to the bloodshed. I can't stand seeing drones fired into settlements of civilians, into schools, which is what Russia is doing, and also young and old men at war fighting for bits of worthless land. It's a horrendous conflict, and that the priority should be to stop it. I think we have to recognise our lack of power to really influence events there. It's an American decision. But back to your question, could we put troops there? Yes, we could. I think the question you're really getting at is, should we? And look, if we don't, as an insurance policy, put NATO troops into some sort of peacekeeping force there, then all Russia is going to do is use this period to rebuild their armed forces. Well, this is whilst Putin's alive, by the way. Whilst Putin's alive, they will take what is essentially an operational pause, rebuild, and then strike again in the future in order to take the rest of Ukraine. And once they've done that, they'll look at other parts of the old Iron Curtain or the old USSR and think, what's next? That's the intention. Is to
you
rebuild.
need a real deterrent there.
Say again?
So you need a real deterrent.
You need a real deterrent. People might disagree with that, but there will be more war in Europe. He doesn't intend on stopping here. The best thing that's going to really change what's going on between Russia and Ukraine is the death of Putin. Two things can happen there. Either the country will start imploding on itself, or an even worse dictator emerges, and we carry on in this sort of hot war, new Cold War stalemate. We don't know how that's gonna pan out. But whilst Putin's alive, we need to take him seriously. That he will take a tactical operational pause, reinvade Ukraine in the future if we don't put something on the ground there, and he'll then fight on to the next piece of the USSR puzzle.
It's been very interesting to see the development of drones in this war, and I guess Ukraine are now world leaders in drone warfare. I wondered if there was any sign of, or rather, let me rephrase this. Where is the British military in terms of advanced technology? Is AI having a part to play in our tech
where we? I mean, I look to we are developing capabilities, and the thing is that you're only really as good as you can test them, and conflict is a great place for developing your capabilities because it negates expensive, complicated, regulated supply chains where you end up going to the big industrial defense companies, and they charge a lot of money to produce very mediocre equipment. What's happened in Ukraine is the best minds, the best entrepreneurs, the best inventors have using AI, using new drones, rebuilding them to advance their capabilities. And so that their ability to come up with new technology and deploy it to the battlefield, you don't have to go through contracts, regulators, you don't have to go through civil service. They just do it because they needed it. We used to have this in what's called the SOE, the Special Operations Executive. We used to have cells that would develop different types of mines, sea mines, rockets, assassination devices, and they were given a budget to test and develop and get it out to the front line as quickly as possible to fight against Nazi Germany. And that has enabled them to become world leaders. Similarly, in Israel, they're probably the world leaders on tunnel fighting because they've been fighting the Gazans in the tunnels, and they're world leaders in a lot of urban combat. I don't want to get into that conflict, by the way.
You don't want to talk about that conflict. You don't want the British involved.
No, I don't want to talk about that. That's just another whole can of worms. There's a lot of can of worms. We're opening some cans of worms here. But we're not going to be at that level unless we have somewhere to field test this stuff. However, there are companies in America that are really amazing at developing groundbreaking technology, like Anduril. I don't know if you heard of Palmer Luckey, and if you haven't, you want to get him on the show.
I've been trying.
Oh, right, okay,
I'd
fine.
love to get Palmer.
He speaks so well, incredibly eloquent, and very politically aligned with us and values. A good guy. They are leading the way, and this is I think industry, and especially subject matter experts or small industry, can react much quicker to new emerging technology than the big defense majors like Lockheed Martin.
So you're referring to this Palantir as well, right? So
that's online and networking and intelligence, and that's analytics essentially. But what I'm saying is we need to break the mold of just allowing big defense contractors, the big industrial majors to get all the contracts, and we need to allow smaller companies, individuals to be entrepreneurial and to invent and to trial and test. And I don't think the British system's been particularly good at allowing the testing and emergence of new kit and equipment, technology, weaponry, AI. That's what we need to invest in. And I hope the next Strategic Defence Review does allow for that, because a lot of the capabilities, those things that came out SOE during the Second World War, they are weirdo inventors coming up with things. They see a gap, they see a niche, and that they were given the money and given the opportunity, and it becomes game-changing, tactically game-changing on the battlefield. That's what we're seeing in Ukraine. It's the ability to quickly innovate and get it out there. We lack that in Britain at the moment.
I want to talk about your documentary and your experiences in South Africa. Very moving interviews that you carried out with some of the victims of the farm attacks. Now, this is a huge story. Interesting that it seems to be a huge concern to the right, let's say, or conservatives, or not the woke progressive side of things. It all came to a head when Cyril Ramaphosa was at the White House Oval Office with Trump, and Trump made him squirm through a video of the political groups in South Africa chanting "Kill the Boer." The Boer, forgive me. That's actually Julius Malema. Yeah, kill the Boer. And we have seen horrific violence in that country. It seems to be disproportionately targeted against white farmers, not exclusively white farmers, but it was already one of the highest murder levels in the world, that country. And curiously, there seems to be complete denial. Actually, it's not just that it's ignored, I note, but denied. So, for example, after the Oval Office, the incident with Ramaphosa, BBC Verify put out a piece, essentially attempting to debunk Trump's position. But here's an example of how they approach it. There's a video of a road in South Africa with 1,000 white crosses lining the roads, and Trump incorrectly said that these were the graves of those victims. The BBC Verify said that's incorrect. It was a memorial service for what they didn't say. Well, it was a memorial service for 2 individuals. What they didn't say was that each cross represented a killed white farmer. So BBC Verify, the BBC fact-checking mechanism, ironically, who fact-checks the fact-checkers? Well, we do here.
Obviously, the BBC pumps out a lot of fake news now.
Yes.
And it's essentially an arm of the state. They're civil servants a lot of them on final salary pensions. A lot of it can't be trusted. And, you see these documentaries like their Hamas-sponsored documentary. Was that Channel 4 or was it BBC? The Hamas-sponsored documentary about the conflict in Israel and Palestine. So, this is what I really regret here is that Trump was ill-informed in the way he went about conveying the information. 2 things. Inaccurate use of photos. One photo was from the Congo of a supposed atrocity. Secondly, calling memorial crosses graves. They were representative memorial crosses, and they represent real lives. So his use of language has undermined what it is. And then secondly, this concept of calling it genocide. I've been to South Africa many times, and I went there specifically to interview white Boer or Afrikaner farmers. And they say that it fits the characteristic of the genocide, but it doesn't. Black and white people are murdered on farms. In South Africa, the country is so chaotic that the murder rate is so high that everybody, or all ethnicities, is under threat at all the time of being murdered. But the real point here is that there is deliberate racial incitement by the EFF under Julius Malema. This is a radical Marxist communist party who hates white people and wants to get rid of them from Africa or Southern Africa. They want to enforce land reclamation without compensation, and if that means through violent means, they will do it. And this song, this so-called apartheid song, bear in mind it's over 30 years since the end of apartheid, they're singing "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer" is incitement, and there have been cases in court where the murderer has said, yes, I've heard this song or sung it or heard the words of leaders at the EFF and I wanted to murder white farmers. So let's be clear here is that there is racial incitement and there is racial hatred and prejudice which is causing the death of white farmers on farms.
Mm-hmm.
But it is not at a level that you can compare to genocide, and I think it's wrong to do that. And it's what's happening with the international left is because they're more interested in decolonization, and they see it's a bit like the Chagos. They don't believe that the Afrikaners have a right to be in Africa, and because they hold more of the land, albeit they are productive on it and feed Africa or feed Southern Africa, they don't have a problem with violence against white farmers, and they basically want to cover it up. So when you've got people of the right wrongly claiming genocide or using wrong facts, the so-called left-wing and fact checkers use that to deny there's a problem.
Yes.
There is a problem. I went there. And what's most staggering about the situation on farm murders, it's not that these people are going and killing them and taking the land, that they are getting hold of children, of pensioners, people in wheelchairs, and torturing them for hours, blow torches, cutting them up. There are cases where, and this is really graphic if you read about it, they're horrendous sexual assault using bottles and knives to cut apart genitalia, hours and hours of brutal torture, rape of children in front of parents or in front of grandparents. These sort of this is sending a message. This is gratuitous. This is not just an act of murder. And of which there are many, thousands of them in Africa. So this is why I made this film, because I want to understand just how serious the issue is and to what extent it's connected to the incitement that happens from when leaders sing these songs. There's two other important facts here. One is that the ANC refuses to condemn that song, which is clearly hate speech. But more importantly, they had a court ruling, I think it was back in around 2012, that said that song, Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, was hate speech. In 2022, they overturned it, so it's now not hate speech.
Why? Do they say free speech?
I don't know why it was overturned, but it just shows that the state doesn't take it seriously.
What's their motivation, do you think, in not condemning or not saying it's hate speech? Is it because they would lose political support if the ANC would lose political support if they condemn it?
But the problem in the country is the ANC and its corruption. They run the country badly, and the EFF broke away from the ANC, so they're sort of the radical communist element. So they're losing support to the left. They're losing support to the Democratic. I think it's called the Democratic Alliance. So there's another opposition party which has control of some parts of the Western Cape and runs their area quite well administratively. So they're not wanting to hemorrhage the votes of people of essentially the racist anti-apartheid vote, which is very important to their identity and to their cause. I don't truly know why, because the international capital they're losing from it, the reputational damage is ridiculous. And in today's day and age, 30 years after apartheid, you'd think, okay, they can keep the spirit of it alive, but you don't need to sing a song which is literally about killing people on their farms.
Right. And people are being killed.
And people are being killed.
It's one thing if there's no one's actually killed.
Yeah, exactly. If people weren't, and bear in mind those crosses, there's been 3,000 people killed on farms, a majority of those white, and a majority of those that have been really brutal. There's something going on here, and it's right that it's been brought to the attention of the White House and the world. It's wrong that it's been downplayed by the BBC and the left-wing mainstream media, but it's also wrong to be used by the alt-right to say this is some sort of genocide.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Let's just pick into the genocide
It's a real
thing.
issue.
White farmers are 44,000. There are 44,000 white farmers in South Africa.
No.
Is that wrong?
1,000, sorry. So how many Boers are there? Oh, yeah. There's
44,000 white farmers.
Yeah.
What problem do you have with that number?
I imagine the figure's a lot higher.
Really?
Yeah.
So I had it that Okay, well, let me broader context. Population 65 million, of whom about 5 million are white.
Yeah.
And the white farmers are, I had it as 44,000, which, and there's been something like 3,000 white farmers killed.
Yeah.
The national murder rate is 42 per 100,000. So that's extremely high for the world, like as a murder rate. But for white farmers, it's 196 per 100,000, the murder rate. So that's the difference there. You're looking at 5 times more.
Mm-hmm.
And but then my question would be, it's farmers, not other whites, right? So let's say in Cape Province, where there's a huge white population, particularly around Cape Town, are those whites disproportionately targeted?
I don't know, and I don't want to speak out of turn about statistics. All I'm saying is that you go to a lot of places and race relations are good. A lot of my friends that work in conservation on reserves or work on farms, they speak Horsey, they speak Zulu, they get on. That there is harmony, and in a nation that's in a fate of a stage of genocide doesn't have that. I think it's, what we're talking about is there is a strain of racial incitement, of hatred, and then there's the apartheid era inequality. The land is held disproportionately
because it was owned before apartheid, and that's just continued.
So I think these issues, it's complex, and it's really annoying when it gets broken down into explainers or fact checkers or social media commentary. This is a complex country with a challenging, complex history. I just went in there to speak to farmers and just to understand how brutal and what life is like. How I was under the impression, by the way, they're all like John Dutton and Yellowstone, all owned like this big property, had nice cars and helicopters, and every farmer is wealthy, and they just exploit the local community who work for them like slaves, like peasants. Not the case. These people are very, very devout religious. They generally live in one-floor, small building farmhouses, which aren't luxurious at all. They work really long, hard hours. They produce a huge amount of food, well, most of the food for southern Africa. They employ people from the local community. They've turned fairly unproductive land into being productive, and now they live in fear of being attacked, raped, and tortured, and having their families killed in front of their eyes. It's a tough life. Is it fair that they have all the land? No, it's not. But it's not a glamorous, easy life. They live in complete fear, and they feel that the state's failing to protect them. And not as only the state failing to protect them, they feel that they are not condoning what is racial incitement, which, as we all know, what the EFF doing is calling for the killing of those people, killing for farmers. So that's the issue.
Sorry to be, I know you don't, it's very emotional, and forgive me but I just want to understand this. Is it that they're being targeted because they're living on large plots of land, that they're perceived to be very wealthy, and there's a jealousy towards...
Yes, yeah.
That's why they are being targeted, rather than, let's say, the extremely wealthy billionaire or whatever, factory owners or the business types who don't have lots of land, but it's targeting the farmers specifically. And I'm just trying to understand why they are.
Land is the eternal battle of humans. People like to own land. Sovereignty is a question of land. Land is important for so many reasons, and that's what's being weaponized is land ownership. Look at Zimbabwe. Okay, land ownership in Rhodesia was not fair, but the country was better structured as it was, and fed not just Rhodesia, but it fed for wider Africa. Mm-hmm. It was a better system. If you just take those farmers out, as happened in Zimbabwe, and then allow people to move onto it and live on it in subsistence farming, you destroy jobs, you destroy the local economy, you destroy the country's ability to feed itself. And look at the inflation on the Zimbabwean dollar or Zimbabwean pounds, whatever it is. Like, you need wheelbarrows. There was a point where you needed wheelbarrows of currency to buy bread. So this is really about ideology and about it's emotional, not logical.
Mm-hmm.
The ANC has failed to deliver better opportunities for all ethnic groups. It's failed to create a plan. Where is their equivalent of Cirencester or the Farming Academy to train black farmers to take over land and run it? Why are they not doing this on an industrial scale and helping to create greater equality in farming and land ownership?
Yes.
Instead, they're weaponizing race.
Yes.
It's very simple. It's the weaponization of
So
race.
the future isn't just bleak for white South Africans,
It's
for black South Africans
It's
as
worse
well.
for black. Let's be clear here. Life is far worse for black South Africans than it is for white South Africans.
Yeah.
It is a country sadly in decline.
And I think it's 59 South Africans have been given political refuge in America. Do you think the British should be taking white South Africans?
I don't think we can take anyone right now. I mean, we have millions of people in social housing in Britain. Our kind of, I think it's the wrong approach. Giving refuge. This is what I mean about it. It's being politicized, and the Trump White House has fallen into this sort of alt-right politicization of the matter. There is a serious issue here. They're right to raise it, but I just don't think. I don't agree with this big photo opportunity of creating saying that they're refugees. I have been to refugee camps. And one that is imprinted on my mind is one in Kandahar, South Africa. And you just see the absolute state of deprivation, poverty, children skinny, not getting water for weeks, living in these UNHCR tents. That to me is a refugee. They've got nowhere to go. They've got no rights. Their life is hell. And I'd hate to see the word dumbed down in the same way as so many words in the English language have been dumbed down and become meaningless, like the word racism, for example.
Well, I might actually disagree. So I think that you're probably right. It doesn't make the state of immigration in Britain. We can't do it. We can't have more people coming here. We need to sort out our immigration numbers. But when it comes to America, where they're just dealing with illegal immigrants, but they still have well over 1 million legal migrants going to the States every year. And if you have farmers who haven't got any assets except for the land, and it's only worth whatever they can farm from it, and they're being targeted disproportionately high and targeted because they're white farmers, then from their point of view, they can't actually necessarily afford to leave and up and leave. They don't have the assets to necessarily. They might not be global citizens in the way that other people are. It's not completely out of the question that they would be given, if they've been told, if they know they're targets of this. They might even have been individually named.
In Cape Town and Johannesburg or Pretoria.
But the farmers that are.
No, but if you stop farming, you're not a farmer. You're just going to go to
So
job.
their options are just go get another job.
That's what a lot of people are doing, leaving farming. But look, I don't want to sort of go into the deep social commentary on all this. All I'm saying is the rights and wrong of granting you refugee status. I just don't want to undermine what a refugee is, and I think it's been politicized by the White House, and you will see from my film, which I'll plug. We've put this out on Outpost Studios on Substack. It's also out on X for free because I want people to see this. It is brutal what's happening, and I wanted to show the real story without it being over politicized by the international left and right. And that is definitely what's happening with this issue. I'm not saying those people aren't poor and it's good for them to have better lives in America, but it's just the optics of it and the way this fight is portraying out. It does not doing any favors to white South African farmers. It's not doing any favors to racial harmony in the country. It's not improving the prospects of different ethnic groups there. It's just with the weaponization of race. And actually, it is quite disgusting what's happened since BLM happened. Or that movement grown is we talk so much more about race. It's horrendous.
Yes.
And I blame the woke left and I blame the BLM movement for that. The fact that we're even having this conversation.
Yeah, I was last in South Africa in January, February 2020, just before the pandemic, and it was unbelievably woke. and the sort of all the slogans, that all of that worldview, the kind of, instead of clapping hands, clicking fingers, and I was like, okay. And reports I've heard is it's much woker than the West.
Where is it?
Where in South Africa?
Yeah.
I was in Johannesburg.
Oh, really? Okay.
I actually had a fantastic time, and and
I
enjoyed it
love
very
the
much.
country, love the people, and it's got so much to give. It just needs to be better governed. But I don't want to be the person telling them that they need to be better governed, although they do need it. But when we've got massive issues in this country.
My last question on South Africa would be: is this a minority group? Because even the EFF they have very few seats in Parliament, something like 39 or something, and not nothing obviously, but is this anti-Boer, anti-white ideology widespread, or is it a minority?
Well, I would suggest that you get Ernst Roots or Ernst Van Zyl from the AfriForum on here, because they're African. I do not want to speak on behalf of them, but what I would say is, I have experience in there working in the country, worked at conservation. It's a great country, and those farms and the brutality of what I saw, the desperation and the fear is real, and that is a tragedy. And look, you're a creative yourself, a musician. I've become a filmmaker since I left the military, and I want to use the skills I've got to shine a light on issues that aren't fashionable in Britain, America, from the mainstream media. Another film I want to make is about the decline and the decline of Christianity in the Middle East and the persecution of Christians. There were so many issues that, like the BBC Two, won't touch. And that's why I wanted to make this film about white farmers in South Africa, because the last film that was made there was sort of Louis Theroux for the BBC, and it was very much about making Boers or Afrikaners, is about stitching them up as racist and still wanting apartheid. That is the angle the BBC will always take. And I just thought, well, let's look at this issue and just look at the lives of farmers and tell their story. And I think there's a big space in what I do in the filmmaking world for shining a light on issues in a non-woke way, looking at things that are really important. And that's why I did my Afghanistan film, looking at the withdrawal and looking at what NATO achieved when people didn't want to discuss those issues. I think we have a responsibility for people with conservative Christian values to make films shining a light on issues that the mainstream media deliberately ignores.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where can people find it? It's on Substack.
So we set up Outpost Studios on Substack, which is documentaries, reporting, and conversations like this, important conversations. That's on Substack. And then we've put it out for free on X, at Outpost Studios on X. It will go out on YouTube in the next 24 hours. It's a 20-minute report, really just looking at the issues through the eyes of two farmers that have been attacked, shot at on their farm, and one in particular, a husband and wife in their 70s. The wife was attacked when she was on her own with a hammer and knife.
Yeah, it's very brutal watching.
It's brutal.
But a very important contribution to people getting awareness for what's going on. So congratulations in that sense. James, thank you so much for speaking with me, and it's been very enlightening.
Well, we'll await the backlash.
Yeah,
but it's
lots of controversy.
It's time to fight for freedom of speech and to fight for our country and the British national interest. And I really hope that we win. We've got to start putting this country and the British people first.
Yeah, it can't be our generation that Britain falls. That would be humiliating.
Well, I'm willing to go back into the fray to fight for it, and I think these conversations are important.
Sounds like we might be seeing you in Westminster.
Well, we'll see. But thank you for having me on, Winston.
James, a great pleasure. Thank you for watching the Winston Marshall Show with James Glancy. Remember, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. And if you head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, you'll get exclusive videos, content, interviews, and ad-free viewing. But until next time, be well.